Hi there, my name is Kelli Frawley, and this is my presentation from Application to Acceptance, a Student's Perspective. So again, my name is Kelli Frawley. I am a graduate student in the Student Affairs Administration program. I applied for a Fulbright in the 2019-2020 cycle to be an English teaching assistant in Argentina. And of course, this presentation will focus on my experience applying for a Fulbright, so you can get an idea of what your experience might be like based off of what I went through. So in this presentation, I am going to talk about my application process in 3 stages: the planning stage, the application process itself, and the Fulbright grant experience. And my hope is that you will be able to hear my story and get a better idea of what's ahead of you in your application process. So, like I said, I applied for a Fulbright grant to be an English teaching assistant in Argentina. So what that means is I was applying for a grant to go to a higher education institution in Argentina to help a professor teach English to students. And so I started my application in May of 2018, submitted my application in October of 2018, discovered that I was a semifinalist in January of 2019, discovered that I had received the grant in March of 2019, accepted the grant in June of 2019, and left for Argentina in March of 2020. So what you can see here is that there was a year between when I realized that I had received the grant and when I left for the grant, so that's something to keep in mind. And there is over a year in between when I started applying for the grant and when I accepted the grant and left for Argentina. So it's just helpful to have a little bit of a timeline here. Something that I'll share right up front is I started my grant in March of 2020, which means that I started my grant at the very beginning of the COVID pandemic. So I was in Argentina for 2 weeks, received training, and then ended up having to return home because of the pandemic. What you'll see here in these images is a little infographic that was in Buenos Aires about COVID. It was up the day that I was leaving. Information was coming out very quickly. And then you can see the group of wonderful people, Fulbright people, that I quarantined with while I was in Argentina. But I'll go into that a little bit more later. First, I want to go back a little bit and look at my planning stage for the Fulbright. So I was attending the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. I was an undergraduate studying English literature and Hispanic studies, and I had studied abroad in Spain. But I was approaching graduation and I just did not know what I was going to do with this English degree and Spanish minor. So I graduated from UT and got an email from their Office of National Scholarships, Grants, and Fellowships, which is similar to our office here at App State, Nationally Competitive Scholarships. So they reached out to me and said, "Hey, Kelli, I think you did pretty well in undergrad. You got some good grades, you got some awards. We think that you would be a really good applicant for the Fulbright." And I had never heard of the Fulbright before. So I had to ask, like, okay, cool, what is that? And they shared with me that this would be an opportunity for me to go abroad, fully funded, to go to another country and either maybe do research or maybe do a teaching experience. And as soon as they said that I could possibly go abroad again and have it be funded, I said, absolutely yes, sign me up, I will do the application. So at this point, I did not know what an English teaching grant was. I thought that a research grant was the only option available. And so I thought, cool, I'm gonna do this application no matter what. Never done undergraduate research, but let's give it a shot. And so I started out as a research grant applicant, planning on doing research on this Argentine poet named Alfonsina Storni. And I had kind of chosen Argentina based on her poetry. I'd taken a class and just really enjoyed it. And I studied poetry in English, so I thought it would be a really cool connection. But as I was talking to the office at UT, they kind of shared, hey, you have teaching experience, you've never done research before, why aren't you applying for an English teaching grant? And suddenly I realized that was an option and immediately switched to that application. And so the advice that I'll give you right now is to make sure to choose the grant type that fits you best. You might think that one grant is more prestigious than the other, or you might think that one grant will be easier for you to get than another, or that it'll look better, but it's most important to choose the grant type that fits your interests, skills, and abilities, because had I turned in that research application, I really don't think I would have gotten it. I hadn't done research in the past, and I had done a lot of teaching experience. And so having that knowledge that there was a grant that fit me better really helped me to get the scholarship. I have images of UT here just to, shout out Go Vols. So I'll go into my next stage, which was the application itself. So I have here some of the steps of my application that I'll go into a little bit further in this conversation here. But I'll start out by saying I had to fill out the Fulbright portal questions. So that was a lot of biographical information. Who are you? Where are you from? What work experiences have you had? Got that all filled out. Then I had to work on 2 essays, the statement of grant purpose and the personal statement. And I also had to send in some forms, transcripts from all the universities I had gone to, language forms that said that I speak Spanish at a proficient level, and recommendations from a few faculty members from the school that I had attended. So again, I'll point out my timeline. I started my application in May of 2018 and then submitted my application in October of 2018. So you can see I took the whole summer and a couple months of fall to complete this application. So my advice to you is to start your application early as soon as possible and set deadlines for yourself to complete things. The Office of Nationally Competitive Scholarships can really help you out with setting those deadlines. So I would suggest contacting NCS to get that set up. So moving into the application a little more in depth, I had to fill out 2 essays. Now, different Fulbright applications will have different components, but typically there will be 2 essays, including the personal statement and the statement of grant purpose. So starting with the personal statement is basically you explaining who you are, why you're interested in the Fulbright, why you think you'd be a good fit for the Fulbright, and why you think the Fulbright would be a good fit for you. So we like to talk about the fact that you're describing who you are, or who you used to be, who you are now, and who you want to be. So this is kind of a way for you to say, here's who I am, here's why I'm a good fit. Now the statement of grant purpose, on the other hand, is kind of explaining what you're going to be doing in your grant period with the Fulbright. So if you're doing an English teaching assistantship like me, you'll be doing a teaching like 20 hours a week or some amount of hours a week. You'll be teaching in the classroom, and then you'll also be doing a side project. So I'll go into each of these a little more in depth right now. For the personal statement, my first draft of the personal statement was very unclear. I was writing about a person that I thought the Fulbright would want to hear about, someone who was just this perfect global scholar who was, didn't make any mistakes and really didn't have any personality. I was writing about someone that I thought the Fulbright would want to hear about instead of writing about who I actually was. So I turned in my first draft, and the people who looked at it were like, okay, I don't know who you are based on this essay. So my first tip to you is to be yourself. In the second draft of my essay, I didn't just write about my accomplishments, I wrote about the things I was passionate about. So I wrote about things like doing improv comedy and doing things like poetry and things that I loved, things that I thought weren't scholarly enough to include, but in the end made my application more compelling because it was more authentic. So I'll also say that my first draft was very long-winded. I basically took my resume and talked about every experience I had and how it could possibly apply to the Fulbright, which is boring and also very long. You have 1 page to complete this essay in. And so I would suggest that you be concise. The way that you can do that is to start by writing that first draft that's way too long and maybe not great, and then take it in for revisions. So Nationally Competitive Scholarships is a great place to go to get your essays looked at, to get it revised, to get some suggestions so it can be as tight and concise as possible. So that brings me to my third step here. Revise, revise, revise. You're gonna write a bunch of drafts of this, and in the end, you're gonna have a really wonderful essay, and it's very possible. So moving on to the statement of grant purpose, like I said, I had a teaching position that I was applying for, and then also I needed to describe the side project that I planned to do. So that was very intimidating to me to kind of decide on a side project. I thought the Fulbright is this prestigious scholarship. I need to come up with something that is equally prestigious, that is going to show that I am someone who cares about the world and wants to make a difference. And so I thought too big. And so I think that's a common trap that people kind of fall into with this side project, is to think about, okay, I'm going to solve hunger in this community, or I'm going to make the education system wonderful. And realistically, you have about 9 months to a year on your grant. So you have to be realistic about what you can achieve in that time. And I think, again, this comes back to being authentic. You have to choose something that is authentic to you, your skills and abilities. So my first tip here is to think about your skills and interests first. What are you capable of providing? For me, I had that interest in poetry and improv, so I could provide that. And then also to think about community needs. And so for me, I was going to an English teaching school, and so obviously English proficiency was important. I took my interest of poetry and combined that with the community need of English proficiency, and said that I was going to make a poetry club that would be conducted in English with a focus of literacy and also creativity. I'll also say, again, gotta be realistic about what you can accomplish in that time period. You might be able to make an impact at the community level, but it might be difficult to make a huge impact at the nation level. So it's important to be realistic about where your sphere of influence is and try to focus on that. So finally, I was very fortunate to receive the Fulbright, and I was able to have my little Fulbright grant experience. So again, I submitted my application in October of 2018, found out I was a semifinalist in January of 2019, received the grant in March of 2019, accepted the grant, and then left for Argentina in March of 2020. So the reason why there was a year between when I received the grant and when I left for Argentina is because Argentina's school year is from March to November, unlike the US system, which tends to be August to May. So it has a different school year, and so there was a long waiting period. That's not necessarily true for every country. It's really about where it's located in the world and what their school year is. So I was assigned to Cordoba, Argentina, at a school called Simon Bolivar, where I was going to be teaching English to people who were aspiring to be teachers themselves, which was really exciting for me. I was really jazzed about it. I moved to Argentina in March of 2020, crazy times. I had 1 week of training in Buenos Aires, and I met a bunch of friends. You can see my cohort here in the bottom right. We're all holding up these like bags that we were going to use for groceries on our grant. And what I'll say is that during that period, I felt a lot of joy and pride and excitement, but I also felt a lot of fear. There's a lot that's unknown about your grant, especially at the beginning. You don't really know what it's going to be like and what you're going to experience, what challenges and victories you're going to have during your grant period. And so you have to really be okay with that discomfort. So my advice here is to get comfortable with uncertainty. In every step of your application, there's going to be uncertainty. You're not going to know if you're going to become a semifinalist. You're not going to know if you're going to become a finalist. And then once you become a finalist, you don't know exactly what your grant's going to be like. But that's kind of where the excitement is, right? So your job is to try to get comfortable with that uncertainty and see it as an opportunity for growth and excitement. It's kind of like an adventure, right? So in the top left picture, you can see me here with all of my friends at a women's march in Buenos Aires. In the middle, I had just like a fantastic pizza, just so good, also in Buenos Aires. And then there's the obelisk there on the top right corner. So that is a little bit about my experience. But I will also say that my Fulbright grant experience happened during the earliest days of COVID. And so this was at the time where international travel was allowed in the beginning. We were really unsure about what this pandemic was going to become. So I went to Argentina, and the plan was that I was going to have 1 week in Buenos Aires and 9 months in Cordoba doing my grant. Well, I ended up having 1 week of training in Buenos Aires and then 1 week of quarantine in Buenos Aires. We thought that it was just going to be 1 week and we were going to go to our grant locations and it would all work out. We would have our 9-month grant period. And even though it was scary to be in another country during the beginning of what we would soon discover would be a year-long, at least, global pandemic, it was also a time where I made a lot of friends. I had a lot of good times laughing with my friends in quarantine. So it was a time of laughter, fear, joy, and support. I still keep up with the people from my grant. We message often. So even though it was scary and difficult, it was something that I got a lot out of and a lot of wonderful connections. So that kind of touches on the be okay with uncertainty part. So I will say that after my week of quarantine, the Fulbright Commission suggested that we do voluntary departures, which meant that we were able to leave the country if we wanted to. We would be able to retain our status as Fulbright alum, and that would not be held against us. They were suggesting that we leave. This was the State Department and the Fulbright Commission. Then we had mandatory departures, where the global Fulbright program was suspended, and we were basically asked to leave. Our grants were suspended and it was over. So if you see on the either side of the screen, I have the Instagram posts that the Fulbright made to announce that the Fulbright program would be having voluntary and then mandatory departures, and that the program would be suspended. So I returned to the US after all this. You can see me in the airport with my mask on with my friend in the corner down there. But what I want to say is that although this was a bumpy and strange experience, I would 100% do it again. So what I mean to say is, even if the Fulbright experience is not exactly what you imagine it to be, it is going to be valuable and life-changing in many ways. And so even if the pandemic has any effect on future Fulbrights, it will still be valuable. And the Fulbright now has way more information about how to handle the pandemic, how to handle safety, and how to handle the grants so that they are still really valuable and can still happen. So my experience will not be your experience. Don't let this deter you at all. Just because I got sent home, that is likely not what will happen for you, but it is my story. So my advice is to find joy where you can. Even though I had this crazy, weird experience, I made a lot of friends. I still look back at those memories really fondly, and it was a really cool experience. I got to go to Argentina for 2 weeks for free, which is fantastic. And it was just a really cool experience that has opened up doors for me. So that is kind of my presentation. That's my Fulbright story. I would be happy to answer any questions that you have about your Fulbright application. I'm so excited for you to go on this journey. So if you have any questions, please email us at ncs@appstate.edu. Thank you so much.